So we're going to assume that the frustration is bad coffee. It's a silly example to give, but I think it's valuable to demonstrate how Touchstone is used to solve a frustration. So the frustration is bad coffee. Every day you come in and there's bad coffee, or some days it's good and some days it's bad and some days there's none at all. So you ask yourself the question, do we have a system for this? And in this case, the answer is no. We do not have a system for making coffee. So we decide to create a system and assign it to a specific position in the organization and then train the individual in that position to make coffee. The first question then is, what is the name of the system? Let's call it Making Coffee. And the second question would be, where would we store that system? Is it a sales process? Is it a client fulfillment process? Is it a management procedure? It's something that's going on behind the scenes. It's not really related to one of these other core functions. So I'm going to select here. Now I'm going to come up here and say add a new process. And I'm going to call the process Making Coffee. And I'm going to put it in the administrative subfunction. I could put it in any of the subfunctions I have, and I can have any subfunctions I wish in this, but at this point I've created it a subfunction called administration, so I'm going to put it in the subfunction called administration and click Save. First thing I'm going to do once I've identified or named a position is I'm going to come here and I'm going to select objective, and I'm going to write a sentence or two that describes what is the purpose of making coffee. What is the purpose of this process? Now, making coffee, the title of making coffee is obvious, but in many cases you will write titles that are not obvious, so this is just a best business practice. So the purpose of a procedure for making coffee to ensure good coffee is made daily. And I'm going to click Save. I have a variety of different tools that I can use to write a procedure. I'm always going to start with a work plan, and in this case I'm going to start with a work plan and I'm going to just simply call it Making Coffee because I'm just beginning and I'm not quite sure how this is going to flush out. What is the first step? How does making coffee begin? Making coffee begins by filling the coffee machine with water. The next step, grind 3/4 of a cup of coffee beans. Next step, and you'll notice that each step has its own task. I usually ask the question after I've written a process, is there anything related to the process that might be important? So for example, fill the coffee machine with water. I might want to make this always use cold water. So I might come in here and I might select always use cold water. I might click here French roast, something like that. I might look at this entire process. I might say the first staff member to arrive at the office will prepare the coffee. And I might have a second expectation here that if you finish the coffee in the carafe, then you will make another pot unless it is after 4 p.m. So you might have some standards around that. So that's what an example of expectations. And I often will use expectations that are relevant to the entire work plan down here. Expectations that are relevant to a specific task I often put up here. Now, then I think about this and I think, well, you know what? This is the coffee for the coffee machine in the general kitchen, but we do have this Nespresso machine as well. So I might want to then create another work plan called Making Coffee Nespresso machine. I might change this one to Making Coffee kitchen machine. And the Espresso machine, it will have an entirely distinct work plan that describes how to use the Espresso machine. I might also upload the manual for the Espresso machine. This might be a PDF file, for example, and so I search for the PDF file, and I would just simply create the file, and now I've got the Espresso machine manual here. Now I find that when I'm training people, they don't do a very good job, so I think, well, let's make sure they're following the process. So I select the coffee machine, and I'm going to run it out to a checklist, and I'm going to require that new people complete the checklist when they're creating coffee. In fact, I might even make a video of the coffee making process to help them. Okay, so now I've got the process written, and we will see it here in running the business. But who's going to do this? A couple of options. I could say that it is everybody's responsibility, in which case I would make the process public and available to all users. But let's say that it's really the receptionist's responsibility, and it's tactical. In other words, it's not a management or a sort of a global visioning process. It's just a very much do it type process. So now I've assigned it to the receptionist, and if I go to my organization chart and click on receptionist, I will see that process right here. And as I add other procedures to the position of receptionist on my organizational structure, the job description will begin to grow. Okay, so now I hire someone named Jennifer to be the new receptionist. And I give her access to our Touchstone account. Let's say her name is Jennifer Madison. And I can fill in all this information if I like, but I'm just going to swing down here and click Create User. And you'll see I now have Jennifer Madison here, and I'm going to make her the receptionist. And this is a staff position. She doesn't manage anybody. You'll also notice that right now I'm only giving her read-only access. As Jennifer gets good, maybe I want her to write some processes or edit existing processes. I may change her access to edit or create, but for now it's going to be read-only. Now I'm going to go to the home screen, and you'll see that because on the organization chart my position is here and the receptionist is below me, so I therefore see the position of receptionist, and I see Jennifer's position. If I'm going to train Jennifer in her job description, I'm going to select her, and all of the procedures on her job description are going to appear here. I'm going to select one of those procedures, and I'm going to train her in making coffee. I'm going to take her through the process, and I'm going to ask her, does that make sense? Do you understand everything? And she says, yes, I understand it. And I'm going to check off that I trained her in that. And I might even check this button and just click Save. I go through the process and show her how to complete a checklist. I might also say that because she's not doing the Espresso machine and only I do the Espresso machine because it's in my office, I'm going to link this process to my job description as well, and that way I have access to how to make Espresso coffee. So now you'll see that this process is on two different people's job descriptions. We now have the process, and I've trained Jennifer. Let's log out and log back in as Jennifer. And Jennifer is just learning how she was trained yesterday. She's just learning how to make coffee, so she decides to follow the checklist. She can come down here and she can open up the making coffee process, and she opens up the checklist, a new checklist, and she goes through it and she does each of these things. And I've told her this is really important, so I want you to fill this out. And all she has to do is click Save. If she wasn't able to do one of these things, maybe there was no coffee or something, she might make a note she's done this, but she wasn't able to do any of the rest of the stuff because there was no coffee. There was no coffee to be ground. So she could write a note and she could click save, and now I would have that in the system. Now if I log in and all of a sudden the coffee, let's say it's the next day or it's sometime later, and the coffee just isn't very good. And so now my question is, wait a minute, do we have a process for this? And I might come up here and say, do we have a process for making coffee? And I search coffee and I say, yes, we do have a process for making coffee. Well, who's responsible for it? Well, I'm the president, but also the receptionist is responsible for it. So I go over to the receptionist and I say, have we trained the receptionist in it? We come over here and we say we have trained, and we can actually look to see when she was trained on May 3rd. And did she follow her checklist? And we can come here to May 3rd and we can click go, and we can say, oh, the reason there's no coffee was there were no coffee beans to be ground. If it had been completed, it would be right here. What I wanted to show was with a frustration, any frustration in your business, the first question is, do we have a system for this? If there is no procedure for it, create it. Very simply, where does it go? Is it a sales process? Is it a client fulfillment process? Is it a management process? Is it a process that happens behind the scenes? If it's a process that happens behind the scenes, we add a new process, and we then completed the objective, and we wrote a couple of work plans. We created a checklist. We might have a manual. We might have a video. The next step is we assigned it to someone on the organizational structure. We assigned it to the receptionist. And now when we hired our receptionist, we trained the receptionist on how to make coffee. And I know I trained her because I can see these check marks are here. I can look here to see when she was trained. And I can look here to see if she's actually completed what I asked her to complete in terms of creating the process or following through on completing a checklist.